Hello everyone and welcome back to Mysterious Murmurs. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story name: The Book That Writes Itself. It was the kind of night that made the small town of Briar Hollow seem even more isolated than usual. The wind howled through the narrow streets, causing the trees to sway like twisted skeletons. The rain pelted against windows, a steady drumbeat that filled the quiet of the night. Inside a small, unassuming bookstore on the edge of town, a single light flickered, casting long shadows on the shelves. Maggie Collins had always loved books. She had grown up in Briar Hollow, and every evening after school, she would wander into the dusty old bookstore on the corner of Elm and 3rd. The shop was owned by an elderly man named Mr. Harrington, who always had a peculiar smile on his face, as if he knew something she didn't. Maggie had come to love the shop's musty smell, the creak of the wooden floors, and the rows upon rows of books that seemed to hold secrets waiting to be uncovered. But tonight was different. Maggie had found herself drawn to a new section of the store, one she hadn't noticed before. The shelves were tucked away in a dark corner, almost hidden from view. The books here looked old, ancient, even covered in dust and cobwebs. But there was one book that caught her eye. It was a large, leather-bound volume, its cover embossed with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. The title was etched in gold lettering, but Maggie couldn't quite make it out. The book was placed carefully on a pedestal, as though it were the shop's most prized possession. Curiosity piqued, Maggie reached for the book. As her fingers brushed against the cover, she felt a strange tingling sensation shoot through her hand, as though the book was alive. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she hesitated. But then the temptation was too great. She opened the book. The pages were blank. Not a single word was written inside. Confused, Maggie turned the first page, then the second, and then the third. Still, there was nothing. The book was completely empty. She frowned, wondering if Mr. Harrington had placed it there by mistake. But as she reached the fourth page, something happened. The letters began to form, appearing slowly, one by one, as if being written by an invisible hand. The words flowed across the page, forming sentences that seemed to describe her very own life. Maggie Collins, a young woman with a love for books, finds herself in the bookstore at midnight, drawn to a mysterious book. Maggie froze. She wasn't sure if she had imagined it, but the words were exactly what she was doing right now. She quickly turned the page, her heart pounding in her chest. She reaches for the book, her fingers brushing against the cover, and feels a strange sensation, as though the book is alive. Her breath caught in her throat. The book was writing about her actions, her thoughts, her very being. It was as if it knew everything about her. The realization sent a chill down her spine. Desperately, Maggie flipped through the pages, each one writing itself faster than the last. The words grew darker, more unsettling, as though the book was beginning to shape her fate. Maggie begins to feel a presence behind her, something lurking in the shadows, something ancient and powerful, watching her every move. Her pulse quickened. She spun around, but the store was empty. The shelves were silent, the rain still pounding against the windows. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, something she couldn't see. The book continued to write. As she turns, she sees a figure in the corner, its eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light, its face twisted in a grotesque smile. Maggie gasped. She hadn't read ahead, hadn't known what was coming next, but now, as the words played out before her, she realized that what the book was describing was happening in real time. She was in the story, and the figure was real. Slowly, Maggie turned back to the corner of the bookstore. Her eyes scanned the darkness, but there was nothing. No figure, no glowing eyes. Yet the air had shifted. The weight of something unseen pressed down on her. She swallowed hard, her hand trembling as she turned the next page. The figure steps closer, its footsteps echoing in the silence of the store, its breath ragged and unnatural. It reaches out for her, its fingers long and twisted. Maggie's body stiffened. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, could feel the cold breath on her skin, as though the figure was just behind her. She refused to turn around, too afraid of what she might see. The book kept writing, each word more insistent than the last. Maggie turns around to face the figure, but when she looks into its eyes, she sees nothing but darkness, a void that pulls at her very soul. Her mind screamed at her to stop reading, to throw the book away, but she couldn't. The words had a hold on her, pulling her deeper into the story with every page she turned. The figure lunges, its hands outstretched, and Maggie feels its cold fingers close around her wrist. The world around her blurs, the edges of reality beginning to crumble. Suddenly, the room went dark. The light bulb overhead flickered and then died, plunging the bookstore into total blackness. Maggie's breath came in ragged gasps, her heart hammering in her chest. She clutched the book tightly to her chest, her only source of light, as though it could protect her. In the pitch-black darkness, she heard it, the soft sound of breathing, uneven and slow, coming from just behind her. She spun around, her eyes wide with terror, but saw nothing. She feels the presence behind her, the cold breath against her neck, the fingers brushing against her skin. The book was writing faster now, the words spilling out in a blur, but Maggie couldn't focus. She needed to get out, to escape, but her legs refused to move. She felt trapped, as though the darkness itself had wrapped its cold tendrils around her, pulling her deeper into its embrace. And then she heard it, a low, guttural laugh. It echoed around her, reverberating off the walls of the bookstore. Maggie turns the final page, and there, written in blood-red ink, the final words appear, "You will never leave." The book slammed shut. For a moment, everything was silent. Maggie's mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. She felt the weight of the book in her hands, but the room was still dark, the air thick with the oppressive feeling of something just out of reach. Suddenly, she heard a voice. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. "You shouldn't have opened the book, Maggie." The voice was soft, almost too soft to hear, but it was unmistakable. And it was coming from all around her. "Now you're a part of the story." The bookstore began to shake, the shelves rattling as though they were alive, and the sound of whispers filled the air, thousands of voices speaking at once, all telling their own stories. Maggie tried to scream, but no sound came from her mouth. The book had written its final chapter, and now she was trapped inside it. Maggie's heart pounded in her chest, her breath ragged and shallow, as she stood frozen in the pitch-black bookstore. The whispered voices seemed to press in on her from every direction, their words incomprehensible, like 1,000 frantic murmurs fighting to be heard. She could feel the air thick with their presence, an oppressive weight that suffocated her very soul. The floor beneath her trembled, and she felt the walls close in around her, their edges blurring like the edges of a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The light above her flickered back to life, casting a sickly, yellow glow across the room. But the store had changed. It wasn't the same place she had entered just moments before. The shelves had shifted, their once familiar contents now appearing twisted, deformed, as though the very fabric of reality had unraveled. She turned her head slowly, her eyes scanning the room, but the shape of it seemed wrong. The aisles were longer now, more twisted, and the books weren't just sitting on the shelves anymore. They were moving. Their pages turned of their own accord, fluttering like wings of disturbed creatures. Some of them were even crawling across the floor, their bindings scuttling like spiders. The book in her hands pulsed with an eerie glow, as though it were alive. She could feel it vibrating with an energy she couldn't explain, the words on the pages seeming to shift, to change. The book wasn't done with her yet. She tried to drop it. She wanted to cast it aside, to run, but her fingers wouldn't let go. The book's power had taken hold of her, and the more she struggled, the tighter its grip became. The words on the page continued to bleed into her mind, painting pictures of horrors she could scarcely comprehend. "You're mine now, Maggie," the voice whispered, the same voice from the pages, the voice that seemed to crawl under her skin and settle in her bones. It was both everywhere and nowhere, speaking directly to her mind. "You will write your own fate. You will never leave this place." The book's pages turned once more, and as Maggie looked down at the words forming before her, she realized with growing horror that they were not words at all. They were instructions. The book will feed on you. The book will claim your soul. But to escape, you must write the ending. You must choose your own chapter. A cold sweat broke out across Maggie's forehead. The words were clear now, written in the same blood-red ink that had filled the final pages. But the implication was horrifying. She wasn't just a part of the story, she had become the author. The book was feeding on her fear, on her very essence. It was using her to rewrite itself, to trap her in its pages. The bookstore seemed to warp around her as she held the book. The shelves distorted into dark, inky shapes, like shadows given form, and the floor beneath her creaked, as though it were alive. Maggie could hear the muffled sounds of whispering, of pleading, of crying. The voices, she realized, were coming from the books themselves, their trapped souls begging for release. The book in her hands was still pulsing with unnatural energy, and as she reluctantly began to read the next line, the words seemed to change before her eyes. To leave, you must rewrite your past. Rewrite the decisions you've made, the paths you've walked. But be careful, Maggie. One wrong word, one wrong stroke of the pen, and you will become a permanent part of this place. You will never escape. The fear that gripped her heart tightened its hold. Rewrite her past? Maggie thought frantically. How could she do that? The book had already rewritten everything for her. Her life had become its story, its canvas. She was trapped inside its pages, but the rules of this game were still unknown to her. The power to change her fate was within her reach, but it came with an unimaginable cost. As she hesitated, the room seemed to grow colder. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The books on the shelves had stopped moving, but their covers now stared at her with hollow eyes. The store had become a dark reflection of her worst fears, and each book seemed to beckon her, urging her to open them, to read their tales of misery and despair. Suddenly, the book in her hands slammed open on its own, and the pages began to turn violently, the words racing across the paper as though they had a mind of their own. "You are not the first, Maggie." Maggie's pulse spiked. The words on the page shifted again. "You are not the first to wander into this bookstore. You are not the first to pick up the book. But none of the others have been strong enough to escape." Her hands shook as she clutched the book tighter. She could feel the weight of its power, of its control, but there was something else. A whispering doubt, a flicker of rebellion inside her. It was as though the book was pushing her to the brink, daring her to make a choice, to alter the course of her life forever. The words continued to spill across the pages, forming a picture she didn't want to see, one she couldn't escape. "The book has claimed many souls, Maggie, but it has always been incomplete. There is a void in its heart, a darkness that needs to be filled. You can fill it, Maggie. You can give the book what it craves. The question is, Maggie," the words slowed, drawing out each letter with agonizing slowness. "Will you?" Maggie stood there, trembling, her mind a whirlpool of confusion and fear. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. There was no way out, no easy escape. The book had already rewritten her fate, and it was up to her to finish the story. But at what cost? She looked down at the book again. The words were no longer just ink on a page. They were alive, breathing, pulsing with the promise of something terrible. The book wanted her soul, wanted to trap her in its endless cycle of stories, of horror. But Maggie had something the book didn't. Her will. The book wasn't the only one with power. Maggie knew that. She had seen what it had done to the others, how it had consumed them, twisted their lives into dark narratives that they could never escape. She had seen the fear in their eyes, the hopelessness as they realized they were trapped. But she refused to be like them. She couldn't rewrite her past, couldn't change what had already been. But she could control the ending. The words in the book swirled before her, shifting like liquid ink, and with a surge of determination, Maggie took the pen in her hand, her grip tight around it. She felt the pull of the book, the force that tried to wrest it from her hands, but she held fast. With a single stroke, she wrote, "The book will burn. The story will end." The room trembled. The bookshelves cracked, the air growing thick with the scent of smoke. Maggie felt a surge of heat, of power, as though the very world around her was collapsing in on itself. The book in her hands seemed to scream in agony, its pages catching fire, the words turning to ash. The floor beneath her buckled, and the air was filled with a deafening roar, like 1,000 voices being consumed by flames. Maggie screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the chaos. The book's power was fading, its grip loosening, but Maggie couldn't stop. The fire was consuming everything, every book, every page, every soul trapped within. And then, with one final burst of light, everything went silent. Maggie stood alone, the bookstore nothing but smoldering ruins. The book was gone. The shelves were empty. She had done it. She had escaped. But as the smoke cleared and the night fell still, Maggie's heart skipped a beat. On the ground before her, amidst the charred remnants of the bookstore, there was one thing untouched by the flames. A single page. The page had no words. Just one simple, unsettling image. Her face. And above it, written in blood-red ink. If you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have a tale of your own or a legend you'd like us to explore? Let us know. You might just hear it next. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Because here the darkness is always waiting just for you.